everybody, Sam Machkovech here, hanging out with StarCraft Remastered, coming to the PC in August for $15. I got to talk to some of the folks from Blizzard working on it to ask how it's going and some of the technical things that are going into this 4K awesome remake.
We came off of Warcraft and we had just started using 3D, and so when we were going into StarCraft, we were like, okay, we have to embrace this new style of using 3D programs, and none of us had any training, so we were kind of green at it. And like, if you look at the models back then, they were really simple, and you know, things were just stuck in front of each other and everything, because we knew that it would eventually get drawn over anyway. So that was like kind of the big thing, was moving into the 3D part. When we were actually working on it back in the 90s and seeing like how it's still being played today, you couldn't imagine that, right? Like, games don't last 20 years, especially then. There were no games at 20 years, so just having a game that we knew that, you know, we added the multiplayer into the game, and that gave longevity, but we never assumed that 20 years later it'd still be being played. What we're doing with StarCraft Remastered, because we need to keep the original gameplay, like you can play our HD version with the SD version, all we wanted to do was act like you're putting on your glasses, like everything's kind of fuzzy. Now we up-resed everything, and now everything's really sharp, you know, so that people coming into the game, they don't have to play at a 640 by 480 resolution. They can play in 4K if they want, if they have it, and if not, like I think it goes to the HD version, and you could play across like HD versus SD versus UHD. What we really did is try and bring the details out that you're missing in the original. For StarCraft 1, we had nothing. We had no code, we had no art assets. There were a couple of people that actually saved personal assets they had worked on at the time. Sam Didier kept all of his sketches, so we had a lot of the original concept artwork, but as for his game artwork, we had nothing. We had no models, we had no, you know, the cinematics were lost, everything across the board were gone. We were lucky that our sound guy, Glenn Stafford, who's still with us, he kept all of the original recordings, so we were able to reprocess those to a higher level, but that was about it. So everything was completely redone. Everything was eyeballed. Like, we did have some of the original concepts, but again, like, didn't really translate into the game. So everything you see is like, we're looking at these low resolution assets, and initially it was just a lot of concepting, like what would the details look like in these? And so we wanted to not necessarily go all the way to StarCraft 2, but we wanted a little of that influence from StarCraft 2 details in the StarCraft 1 assets. So we were trying to be as close as possible to the original, and we had some problems because in the original game, assets were rendered at different perspectives. The shadows are in the wrong places, the lighting is different across the board, but we wanted to make sure that going into seeing StarCraft HD, or Remastered, is you recognize everything instantly. We didn't want any disconnect, we didn't want any hesitation, so if you see the HD asset, it should look exactly like you remembered it, and that was the main goal. So we do still have some of the problems with the perspective and the lighting and the shadows, because we didn't want to change anything. So, you know, because just a little bit off, you would say, wait, what was that?
It was a really unique project for us in that we couldn't touch any of the gameplay, so we had to make changes under the hood of the engine, but we wanted to make sure that the game played exactly the same. Some things that people might even consider to be bugs. There were definitely challenges with that in terms of rewriting the renderer, for example, but even the renderer in the old code base is kind of hooked into input in some places, so we had to make sure that we went back and made sure that these nuances and these oddities of the original game are still there.
Some of the units don't necessarily translate very well in the higher resolution. Things that, you know, that are small and they're like 16 pixels and they're blurry and everything like that, when you bring them up to, you know, higher resolution, you kind of see like the strangeness and proportions or whatever. But we wanted to keep all of that anyway, because that's how it was, that's how the original was, and we didn't want to redesign anything.
I was thinking maybe the pathfinding is something we want to fix, because it's kind of weird by today's standards, but then when you drill down into it and you see how the pros are using this, you realize, no, we can't change that. That's an intrinsic part of the game now.
I actually think things look really good. Like, some of my favorite things. We did, like the Zergling has hands on his back instead of claws, because in Sammy's original concept, that's how it was. And if you look, the only time I think you actually see it is the wireframe of the original Zergling, and you can see he has hands. And so that was the kind of the only time you knew it. So we kind of popped all of those details back and like tried to get as much as the original concepts into the game as possible. We added a lot of things that you can turn on as options in case that you want to play with better lighting. We added depth maps, normal maps, brightness maps, everything to these units, so it kind of gives them a little more of a 3D feel. And with like real-time lighting and everything, explosions, you know, it brightens up the units. But we didn't want to just throw that in and say you have to use it, because some people might not want it. They just want to play it the way they remember it, so that's an option. We added additional angles to the rotations. A lot of the units only had 9 angles and they're flipped. And so we added the full 17 to all of the units now, so things will rotate better and kind of move in the direction they should be. But that's also an option, just in case you don't want the edited angles. We up-resed the original cinematics because they were all gone. So we had a lot of green screens, we call them. They're just basically a big page of text kind of explaining the stories. We're taking those and we're making these comic versions to explain the story a little more, and like a little more action rather than just a big screen of text. So we have our cinematic team working on that. They're going to be kind of like a 2.5D animated comic book kind of style. My biggest thing is actually the gameplay. Like, and when we first started and we started having that switch back and forth between the SD and the HD, and you'd come into the office, right? Is this the HD or the SD? And then in my mind, I'm like, that's a bad thing. But then I'm also, no, it's a great thing. You know, it's like I want to be that part where it's like, I remember it this way, it's HD, and it still feels like it's the original game.
You don't want to mess with something that, in many people's eyes, is perfect, oddities and all.
In your mind, it's so much better. And I think to the point, we made this game like we remember it. And that's what I'm really kind of proud of.